we live our lives under a comforting delusion of control. We believe that the boundaries of our bodies are sacred and that our biological functions are governed by a silent, civilized contract. We trust that the air we release is within our discretion, but that trust is a fragile mask, and it is slipping. Imagine the loss of the most basic form of physical restraint. Imagine a world where the internal pressure of your own anatomy becomes an unrelenting, violent master. We have long laughed at the involuntary release of gas as a social stumble. But what happens when that stumble becomes a terminal fall? What happens when a biological malfunction spreads like a plague, turning the human voice into a cacophony of guttural failure? Today, we peel back the skin of the most disturbing pandemic humanity has never prepared for, the total loss of eructation control. This is the sound of the abyss. This is discovered. To understand the nightmare, we must first look at the clinical reality of the human esophagus. The act of burping, or eructation, is a complex coordination of the upper and lower esophageal sphincters in a healthy body. It is a necessary safety valve for the air swallowed during eating, breathing, and speaking. But in the winter of 2027, a mutation occurred. It targeted the vagus nerve. A synthetic neuro-parasite, likely a byproduct of unregulated bioengineering or a prehistoric pathogen released from the melting permafrost, found its way into the human microbiome. It targeted the neural pathways that govern the relaxation of the upper esophageal sphincter. The result was spasmodic eructation syndrome, or SES. It was not a cough or a sneeze. It was a permanent, involuntary relaxation of the body's internal seals. The first stage of the pandemic was characterized by a loss of dignity. In crowded elevators, quiet libraries, and the halls of Parliament, the sound began a single, uncontrollable burst of pressurized gas. At first, the world reacted with humor, then with confusion. But as the infection rate spiked, the humor turned to a cold, clinical dread. In SES, the stomach does not simply release air, it becomes an atmospheric pump. The parasite triggers chronic aerophobia, subconscious, compulsive swallowing of air combined with a paralyzed open sphincter. The victim becomes a biological conduit. The sound is no longer a burp, it is a diaphragmatic scream. The physical toll of this condition is devastating. The human esophagus is a delicate tube of muscle not designed for the constant, abrasive passage of high-velocity air. Within weeks of infection, patients suffer from Barrett's erosion on a catastrophic scale. The constant reflux of gastric acid, carried upward by the unrelenting stream of air, dissolves the lining of the throat. The voice is the first thing to die. The vocal cords, scarred and burned by acid, lose their ability to vibrate. Communication becomes impossible. A society built on speech is silenced by the sound of its own digestion. The pain associated with SES is described by survivors as a tearing from within. The internal pressure of the stomach leads to gastric distension so severe that it threatens to rupture the organ. This is the physical stretching of the abdominal wall until the skin becomes translucent and bruised. Malnutrition follows rapidly. To eat is to invite a violent expulsion of material. The act of swallowing becomes a trigger for a gastrointestinal backfire that can flood the lungs with gastric contents, causing aspiration pneumonia. We would be forced to eat through tubes, but even then the air would not stop. The psychological gallows of this pandemic are found in the loss of inner silence. In a world of SES, there is no quietude. The symphony of the damned is a constant roar that permeates every home and street. Meditation is impossible. Sleep is a fragmented nightmare of gasping and choking. The personality dissolves under the sensory assault of its own body. We would see the rise of release valve communities, where people live in soundproofed bunkers, their bodies connected to venting systems in a desperate attempt to maintain a shred of sanity. The danger is not merely internal. The collective eructation of a global population would inject trillions of liters of greenhouse gases directly into the local atmosphere every single day. In urban centers, the air would become a toxic miasma of sulfur and expired biological matter. Oxygen levels in enclosed spaces would drop as they are displaced by the runaway production of gastric gas. We would be suffocating in the byproduct of our own existence. The economic collapse would be total. Imagine a surgeon who cannot stop the rhythmic spasms of their own diaphragm, or a pilot who cannot communicate with a tower. We would see the death of entertainment and the end of diplomacy. War would break out not over ideologies, but over the resources needed to mitigate the smell and the sound of the infected. In zero gravity, the horror reaches a peak. NASA has already studied the dangers of intestinal gas in orbit. Without gravity to separate liquids from gases in the stomach, every burp is a wet event. For an astronaut infected with SES, a spacesuit becomes a coffin. The visor would be clouded by a toxic spray of gastric acid, blinding the inhabitant and corroding life support systems. The International Space Station would become a floating tomb of biological failure. Innovation would attempt to capitalize on the misery. We would see the rise of BurpShield masks with activated carbon filters and gadgets like the SilentBurp 3000, designed to muffle the sound and neutralize the odor with artificial scents. But these are merely bandages. The fundamental problem is in the DNA. If our bodies started producing air like a broken compressor, we might eventually evolve natural release valves, extra-anatomical vents in the neck or chest. But that evolution would take 1,000,000 years. We have only months. The sleepy seal position would become a death trap. In a world of cess, the simple act of reclining would turn a human being into a living soda fountain of acid and gas. We would be forced to live standing or strapped into vertical frames. Our social lives would collapse like lasagna left in the sun. Job interviews would be a gas-powered roulette, where the most qualified candidate is passed over because they cannot finish a sentence without a blast that shatters the room, said Focus. The cause of this pandemic would not be a carbonated drink. It would be the result of our own interference with the microscopic world. Whether it is a lab-made neuro-parasite or a prehistoric virus waking up in the permafrost, the reality is the same. The floor is thinner than you think. Our control over our sphincters and our dignity is a fragile gift from a stable microbiome. When that microbiome is breached, the human being is reduced to a venting machine. As years pass, burps would become our only language. 1 burp for yes, 2 for no. We would become a species of biological failures, our culture reduced to the management of our own rot. We would be a silent world, filled with the loudest sounds imaginable. The discovery of cess is a reminder that we are not the masters of our anatomy. We are a collection of tubes and valves held together by a thin thread of neural integrity. When that thread is cut, we are nothing more than a gas-powered tragedy. The eructation is a warning shot from the planet, saying there is too much pressure down here. This is a clinical report on the liquidation of human dignity. We have spent our history fearing the Great Flood or the Great Fire. But we never feared the Great Burp. We never thought our own digestive system would be the instrument of our erasure. We are a species that is currently poisoning its own future, and there is no window left to open. The abyss is not a hole in the ground. It is the void inside us, waiting to be filled with the air of our own undoing. The pressure is rising, and the sound you hear in the night is the planet getting ready to speak. If you are prepared to face the truths that the world chooses to ignore, stay with us. There are many more biological anomalies and scientific horrors waiting to be unburied. We will continue to explore the truths that have been hidden in the shadows of our own anatomy. Subscribe to Discovered and activate the notification bell. In a world of comfortable delusions, we provide the cold, clinical evidence of reality. Do not miss our next report, where we will examine the next impossible scenario that threatens the very definition of humanity. See you in the next investigation. Remember, hold your breath while you still can. The pressure is coming for you.